Good morning, everyone. Just allowing more folks to enter into the space. We'll be getting started shortly. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're just going to take a few more moments to allow for more folks to enter into the room. Okay, we'll get started in about 1 more minute, folks. Okay. So just seeing a few more folks trickling into the space. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. This is so exciting. A few more folks trickling in. Good morning, everyone. Okay, we're going to get started because an hour may seem like a lot until Allison and Jhanelle start talking, and then you realize an hour should really have changed to a full day. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us for yet another Restore session. Thank you for journeying with the Anti-Racism Office and with Heals, in partnership with Heal Studio, as we continue to reprioritize us. Thank you for prioritizing yourself. As we continue to hold very intimate and intentional spaces that's focused on all things anti-racism, focused on our journeys in healing and addressing racial trauma, just focused on in creating a space to allowing us to just be. And so for this morning's particular session, this particular session is open to folks who identify as racialized, as well as for folks who identify as allies, as we're going to be centering the importance of allyship in mindfulness and in our journeys of healing and the connections between all of these important factors as we continue to move forward. So Natasha, I'm going to ask for you to click over to the next slide. So my name is Jody Glean. I'm director of the Anti-Racism and Cultural Diversity Office, and I'm joined with the fulsome anti-racism team, including Saima Beg, Amir Esmail, and Natasha Prashad. So just want to say good morning on behalf of the team to each and every one of you. And of course, we have some fabulous presenters and facilitators from community. I call them friends and sisters, even though they may not call me that, but that's okay. But just so that they know that we are friends in spirit. and
real life.
And I've also been quite a fan of their work, even before we've had the privilege and the joy of connecting. So I am honored, Jhanelle Peters and Allison Hill, to have you present. So first things first, so it's saying about me, I'm going to keep my remarks very quick, but just wanting to highlight some key factors is that one, kindly note that this particular session is being recorded. Not all of our Restore programs are recorded, but this one is has a bit more of a discussion focus to it. And so Allison and Jhanelle would speak to more about how we're going to create safer spaces given the reality that this is being recorded. So just wanting to invite folks as it relates to privacy, confidentiality, safety, and security, feel free to engage in the changing of your names if you so wish to do so, because this particular recorded session and the dialogue session particularly will be posted on the Anti-Racism Office's website. So we just want to make sure that that is front and center. Natasha, please click to the next slide. wanting to acknowledge that as we continue to hold intentional conversations on racism and creating out pathways for our personal journeys and our institutional journeys in anti-racism efforts and initiatives, that we do so in centering our ongoing commitment and action planning with Indigenous peoples to the Truth and Reconciliation Act. We were gifted with a pathway, with a list of actions that we can all engage in professionally and personally as we continue to build authentic relationships with Indigenous peoples. And we have been living and witnessing the impacts of colonialism, and more so recently as we look at the situation in Nova Scotia. It's important for us to continuously understand that these conversations did not start today. These conversations have been meant to be, that these conversations have started for years prior to, and there's so much more work needed to be done to ensure full liberation and freedom for all communities. And we need to figure out what our role is in this conversation in relationship building, reconciliation, and Indigenous peoples. Natasha, next slide. And so, of course, inviting all of us to hold each other accountable as we create spaces for love and healing and action. Take that word respect, define it for yourself, manifest it in our interactions. Most importantly though, as it relates to an engagement guideline, I just ask for you to just be. If it's one thing we wanted to create with the Restore program, is a space of just being, all of who you are in this moment, however, which way you need to position yourself, put your foot up if you have to, just position yourself in the best, most comfortable means. And just going to ask that you hold space with us this morning. And finally, of course, as we keep, given the realities that we are virtual, and knowing the existence and presence of Zoom bombing and egregious acts of violence that can and have taken place virtually, know that if there are any major disruptions of which us as organizers are unable to control, or we lose control of the platform for any reason, I will be asking all folks to log off immediately, and we will have to reschedule the session just to ensure as security and safety to the greatest extent possible for all of us who are joining this morning. Next slide. And so without much further ado, I am pleased and proud and elated to introduce once again Allison Hill, who's the creator and curator of Hill Insider, visionary behind this particular Restore program, as well as Jhanelle Peters, who's a registered psychotherapist, a member of the Ontario Society of Registered Psychotherapists, and one who I've had the pleasure of just being in her presence and engaging in our first session a few weeks ago. And I am so very excited to be able to hold space with both of you again. And at that moment, I'm going to also take off my camera. So again, just asking for all folks, please keep your cameras off. Please mute yourself if you're, for whatever reason, unmuted. And I now like to hand it over to Allison and Jhanelle for further dialogue.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. My name's Allison Hill. Jody did a really good job of introducing me, and Jhanelle too. I would like to say thank you, Natasha, for controlling these slides here today. And I want to start out by saying, I too am over Zoom. I'm over it. Nobody likes it. I've done absolutely everything on it, birthday parties, baby showers, yoga, teaching, everything. Nobody likes it, but alas, here we are. So I appreciate you all showing up today to engage in this conversation with us. Jhanelle is a registered psychotherapist, and she is going to be the second voice in the room because I believe that there's a lot of different ways to approach this. There is not one way. And I would like to say that thank you for listening to some of our ideas of how to approach mindfulness. And I hope that you feel comfortable sharing some of yours with us today too. Jhanelle, you want to say what's up to the people?
Good morning, everyone. I think Allison and Jody summed up the introduction perfectly. Like we said, we only got an hour, which tends to slip away. So we will get started.
Okay. So today we are discussing approaching allyship with mindfulness. Since the first time in civil rights, or recently, we've actually had the opportunity to experience what a civil rights movement looks like in our generation. And now we're getting the opportunity for those who want to come forward and help to discuss what allyship really looks like. Now, allyship can sound like a daunting task, but today I would like to discuss the small steps that we can take to show up as allies that will make a big difference in those we care to help. There is so much discussion around what an ally actually is. And many of your Black, Indigenous, and people of color counterparts have been inundated with questions that open wounds, trauma, and painful memories. Tasked with the question of how to solve the complexities of racism. Natasha, next slide, please. So what is the intention today? Nothing without intention. Our intention today is to lead you through a series of questions and prompts that will help us approach allyship with mindfulness. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have to acknowledge is that speaking up is not easy and, quite frankly, is not without consequence. So as I lead you through these questions and prompts, I would love to hear from you. How are we going to facilitate that today? Well, we are going to use our text box. But if you don't want to share out loud, that is okay too. What I'm going to ask is that you grab maybe some paper, a pen, a journal, something to write your ideas down. We want to make sure that this space is safe. When Jhanelle reads from the text boxes, we're going to ask that you leave off any commenters' names. That okay with you, Jhanelle?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, good to go. I would like to go to the next slide, please. What we would like you to do today is to invite you to find moments of activations in the things that we are discussing. So what's on the list today? What are we doing today? Okay. Today we change the perception. We're going to observe without bias, and we are going to activate our advantages. Guys down for that? Okay. Now I'm going to just do a little chat box exercise here. If you're with me, and you're kind of over Zoom, but you're still down for it today, I just want a little good morning in the text box. Okay. Everybody's over Zoom. Me too.
Over Zoom and very polite.
Okay, then let's get through this together. Some of these questions, they're going to feel a bit prickly. Some of these things are going to feel a little uncomfortable. But I want you guys to engage in this as best as possible, because when you're starting out with something new, it's important that we attack it with a sense of mindfulness. Okay, let's move on to our next slide, please. Okay, so we've got our first incident here up on the screen. Thank you so much. I love the good mornings. Okay. Let's change the perception, okay? I want you guys to all imagine, and this may be something you've been through before or maybe not. Let's say an incident at work happens surrounding racism, okay? Perhaps you're the victim, perhaps you're the witness. Who is the first person or department that comes to mind that can offer you support? Okay, we're getting some answers. That's good. If you're not seeing them out, if you're not putting them in the type, oh, look, Jody. Oh, Jody offers support. Yes, she does. Okay, if you're not putting them in the text box, I want you to think about it. Did the answer come to you quickly? And if you had to go there right now, would you feel safe doing so? Do you believe that your concerns would be met objectively. Let's go to the next slide.
Kind of a mixed response. A lot of people definitely put in where they would be able to find that support. But when the second question, when you asked, would they know where to go? We have a combination of both. Like, yes, would they could be able to confide in them in a sense? We had a big mixture of yes and no's. So it's going to be an interesting conversation today.
Okay, lots of perspectives. So the term allyship and how to approach it has become rather polarizing. And we're seeing this theme even come up in like shows and podcasts and books. People want to help, but how do we go about doing so effectively? When it comes to approaching the topic of allyship, it can be intimidating because we're all still learning how to move forward in this way. So I scoured books and the internet. This is the best definition that I have found so far around what allyship looks like. An ally is someone who is not a member of the underrepresented group, but who takes actions to support that group. It's up to the people who hold positions of privilege or advantage to be active allies to those with less access, and to take the responsibility for making changes that help others be successful. Now, from this definition, you can use the text box here. What word jumps out to you? What word jumps out to you when you describe what an ally looks like? Okay, we got support, action, responsible, privilege, responsibility, access.
Empathy.
Empathy.
I love how people started pulling out words that aren't even in there too as well, that said like, you know, this is what it summarized for me. That's really interesting.
Exactly. An ally it's a dynamic word. It's not one thing. So maybe you don't feel equipped, like you have all the skills to be the best ally. Part of you. So lots of different ways we can approach this. Let's go to our next slide. Okay, so where do we begin? Now, one thing that came up a lot in this discussion and in my research, preparing for this presentation, I asked a lot of my colleagues, what did it feel like when people reached out to you when you were experiencing a lot of the trauma that was happening with Black bodies and the civil rights movements that we were witnessing and the protest and the murder of George Floyd? How did it feel when people were reaching out to you? Now, the answers varied. Some people said, you know what, it was nice. Some people said, you know what, it's quite frankly, it was quite irritating. It was a little invasive. And this kind of highlighted to me that being an ally is not necessarily easy to do, because the people that you are looking to support are going to have varying ways that they accept your support. Okay, so a couple things to consider if you want to be an ally. The first, and this is probably the most important, folks, if you have a pen, write it down. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally, okay? Racism is a complicated, many-layered system developed over centuries. It will not be quickly undone. It will not be undone just because you said sorry, or because you noticed, or because you feel bad. It will not be quickly undone. It will take mindful steps and intentional steps every day by everyone to move this forward. The second thing is that racism is not the person of the underrepresented group's fault or problem to solve. Next slide, please. If your inquiries, your help, your well-intentions are met with a little bit of hesitation, there's a couple of things that are important to appreciate in this moment. One may still have trauma, pain, or stress associated with your inquiries. One may not have processed enough to want to unpack with you. Now, I use the cool way to spell unpack because of Instagram, but I realize that's not the way to spell unpack. But one may not have had enough time to process what they're experiencing to want to unpack with you or anyone. One may not feel safe from judgment or consequences. And quite frankly, we don't all share the same perspectives, solutions, or conclusions. Being an ally doesn't necessarily, next slide please. Being an ally doesn't necessarily mean that you fully understand what it feels like to be oppressed in a certain way. And to be fair, that's not what it calls for either. It calls for you to appreciate it and help us carry the load. The quote here is, an individual from an underinvested community cannot easily cast away the weight of their identity or identities shaped through oppression on a whim. They carry that weight with them every single day for better or worse. An ally understands that this is a weight that they too must be willing to carry and never put down. Okay. Jhanelle, we're gonna go into our discussion piece here. You on mic, girl? Okay.
Ready.
All right, everybody in the chat box. Are you guys still with me? Send me a hey, hi, hello. Yep.
They're here.
Hi. Boom. Okay, we're gonna go into the discussion piece. Next slide, please. Boom. Okay, so the first question here is about the mindfulness piece. Do you consider yourself, ask yourself please, am I a safe person to confide in? Do I listen without judgment? Do I protect despite my discomfort? And we don't have to only think about this in terms of allyship. Are you a good listener to your friends, your kids, your spouse? Because it all works together, right? And also another thing worth mentioning about allyship is that it can feel kind of divisive, right? Right now, we are talking about anti-Black racism. We're talking about racism in the workplace, in our educational system, all these different places where it can exist. But allyship is something that we all can participate in. Anti-Black racism isn't the only fight. This is something that can be applied to all of us in many sections of our lives. So back to the questions now, and I'm gonna ask Jhanelle to maybe pull out some answers if you see any you'd like to highlight. Am I a safe person to confide in? Do I listen without judgment? Do I protect despite my discomfort?
So, of course, there were a lot of yeses. I think one of the really interesting statements is, I hope so. So that's the first one that I'll start with, is that we got some, I hope so. I hope I'm that safe person. I hope I listen without judgment. And I guess my question to add to that, just something for you to reflect on personally, is, well, how do we transition it from hope to knowing that, yes, this is something that I can be. This is something I'm confident in, feeling that, yes, I'm a safe person. And then the second one that came up that was also really interesting was, am I this person for myself? Like when you said, take it out of context of just what we're speaking here today, people said, well, do I listen to myself without judgment? And I think that's a really important thing to reflect on, because sometimes it can be challenging to do that with somebody else if you're somebody that's always full of your own self-doubt, right? Or you have your own harsh critic towards yourself. So those are some of the really interesting ones. I'll keep piling through as we go on, but those ones really stood out.
Okay, amazing. Now these questions are going to be important to carry into our next slide, Natasha. Okay, so we've got a little bit of information now. Our next step is to observe without bias. Now, it's very hard to do so, okay? And we only have an hour today, so I'm not going to act like it's an easy thing to drop all our biases. But let's go to our next slide. Got a little prompt here, okay? So we've got a scenario. Many of you may have been a part of something like this or experienced something like this. Follow along with me. You've overheard a Black colleague expressing discomfort at work for what they explain as an incessant microaggression from a fellow colleague. They have confronted the individual without a change in behavior. You know the individual, but you haven't witnessed what your coworker describes for yourself, and you have a good relationship with said individual, and you find them to be quite friendly. But one day, by chance, you happen to witness the individual commit the microaggression against your Black colleague just as they described. Now, imagine for a moment here that this individual is your colleague and they're in the same role, same level as you. How would you react? You can put this in the text box, you can answer in your brain, you can write it down. How would you react? Next slide, please. Is speaking up something that you feel comfortable doing? Why or why not? And if you choose to, is there another way you lend your support? Now, let's consider that this individual is your superior. And speaking up could make working with them uncomfortable for you. Is speaking up something still that you would feel comfortable doing? Jhanelle, what does it look like in there?
So I'm seeing some comments as yes, for sure. And then there's other ones where people are wondering, well, will I make the situation worse if I speak up?
Okay.
And also, just the general context of it not being easy to speak up. And that is 100% correct, right? We all have maybe went through that situation or had that encounter where it's like, if I say this, what is it going to do? What's the outcome going to be? And am I going to make it worse for the person I'm speaking up for? Am I going to make it worse for myself? And back to what you were talking about before, Allison, where naturally it happens, we reflect back on ourselves sometimes, and it's really hard to pull the two apart. So yeah, those are some of the comments that came up. And a really good one, sorry, that just popped in is asking that colleague, well, what would you like me to do? Or what can I do? I thought that was a really good one as well.
Okay, I love this. You guys, this is why I love mindfulness, because you guys are leading me through my slides. You don't even know what the next one is. Okay, boom, Natasha, let's see what the next slide is. Okay, so there's different ways that we can take in information when we witness people dealing with racism or anything that they might need support in, where we as an ally can step in. Okay, so today we are going to consider that your privilege is a heavy boot that keeps you from, imagine your privilege is a heavy boot that keeps you from feeling when you're stepping on someone's feet or they're stepping on yours, while the oppressed people only have on sandals. If someone says, ouch, you're stepping on my toes, how do you react? This question is important because when it comes to understanding different perspectives, it takes intentional acts of mindfulness. Many of us are locked in echo chambers where our opinions, our values, our beliefs are being mirrored back to us through what we read, what we see in the news, what we see on social media, our friends, our family. We're hearing a lot of the same information over and over again that's reinforcing the things that we believe. But what about the perspective of somebody that's outside of our box? So again, let's imagine privilege as this heavy boot, okay? We're stomping on people, not on purpose, but you got the boot on. Some people have sandals, some people don't. Okay, now let's go to our next slide. There's two different ways that we can take in this information. We can center self. Okay, that's the first way. Centering self, even as an ally, might look like, I can't believe that you think I'm a toe stepper. I'm a good person. Okay, centering self might sound like denial that others' experiences are different from yours by saying, I don't mind when people step on my toes. Derailing might sound like, some people don't even have toes. Why are we talking about the people with toes? Let's talk about the people without toes. Now, not next slide yet. Refusal might sound like, or refusal to center the impacted might sound like, all toes matter. I know you guys have heard all toes matter before. Next slide, please. Tone policing might sound like, I'd move my foot if you asked me more nicely. Denial that the problem is fixable might sound like, toes getting stepped on are a fact of life, Jhanelle. You'll just be better off if you get used to people stomping on your toes. Victim blaming, you're like, my toes, ow. Okay, victim blaming might sound like, well, you shouldn't be walking around with people with boots. And withdrawing might, I thought you wanted my help. I guess not, I'll just go home. When you commit to being an ally and you don't necessarily get the response you want right away, withdrawing might sound like, I thought you wanted my help, but I guess not, I'll go home. Next slide, please. Now, in reality, when we think about it in a simple term of like toes and boots, we know the right way to react, right? So let's use those same principles when it comes to when we witness or when we've committed an aggression. By centering the impacted. Centering the impacted could sound like, are you okay? Full stop. And then listen to their response and learn. Apologize for the impact, even if you didn't intend it, by saying, I'm sorry. You can stop the instance by, let's say this one together, move your foot. Just move your foot. Move your foot out the way. And you can stop the pattern by being careful where you step in the future. Now, ideally, when it comes to oppression, there are some ideas that we should just all get rid of all the boots and all the sandals, and we should just all live in a utopia. But right now, that is not the case. So if you have a boot, and we all have boots, be mindful where you step. Okay, let's move to our discussion. Now, before we start that, chat box, are you with me?
Well, they're here. They're here. A lot of people are putting what they would have done in that situation, such as,
Okay, let's hear from that. I want to hear that.
apologize. They're saying this is such a great metaphor. It's such a great way to, put into context what's actually happening in the real world. And then, of course, yes, we're still here. Keep going. This is great. So time for the discussion. Allison, what do we got?
Okay, let's go. So our questions are, now that we've thought about this, do I listen to others with an open mind? Do I center the impacted? Have I considered their experiences? Before I conclude a situation, have I heard from the underrepresented?
Yeah. So a good thing just to kind of add to this thought process while you guys are reflecting, and all this is really to get you guys to think about things, right? Reflect what comes up and how do I respond now and what do I need to think about changing? That's really where this is going. We're not giving you the answers. We're giving you that time and that space to have that mindfulness approach and really think about what do I need to do to kind of provoke some type of change for myself, and the greater good gets impacted at the end. But one of the things we saw your responses earlier about how, the boot responds, right? What can happen in that situation? But then here, what you're reading is the thoughts that you should have before the response, right? These are the things that you want to ask yourself before you go ahead and have any of those responses that are listed, and decide, do I need to change the way I planned on responding now that I've heard what this person has to say?
And I would also note that in this scenario, and I'm not going to slide too far back into the slides, but the first portion of the scenario said that you overheard a Black colleague expressing discomfort at work for what they explain as an incessant microaggression. Now, if we're honest and we're paying attention to our environment, a lot of these things are coming up and we're seeing them. We're hearing them, we're maybe overhearing them. Are you mindful of your environment, even if it's not brought up? Or even if there isn't a startling incident? Are we mindful of how we're moving through the world and how the things that we are doing are impacting others? Are you witnessing microaggressions? Are you witnessing somebody being oppressed, missing out on opportunities? Are you witnessing these things? And what are you doing, even if they don't tell you it's a problem? Okay, let's slide on over to our next section. Jhanelle, was there any more comments you wanted to pull out from that?
I feel like people are really just taking the time to reflect and just looking at the different keywords that you shared to say, you know what, this is really helping me recenter and think about how I need to frame things and how I need to process, think really internally, the impact that it has on me, to realize what impact is it going to have on somebody else when I'm discussing or thinking about the answer that I'm going to give. So I think it's really causing people to reflect, and that really is the purpose of this.
Okay. If you're ready to activate your advantages, give me a yes. Give me a thumbs up. Give me a heart. Give me whatever you need to give me so I know to keep going. All right. We got yes, 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 hearts, yes. Okay. Amazing. Now,
I'm here for the hearts. I'm here for the hearts.
Beautiful. Okay. Before we leave today, we're going to talk about activating our advantages. And privilege is kind of like a dirty word a little bit, right? I want to align privilege with advantages here, because that's essentially what it is, right? Each of us lie in certain descriptors, and all of those descriptors, no matter what, carry an advantage, right? So we all have the power to be allies in many different aspects of our lives. So we're going to do a little exercise here. Next slide, please. We're going to acknowledge privilege and or advantage, okay? So I want you to get a pen, pencil. This is gonna require a little math, not really. Okay, list 3 descriptors of yourself, right? You can use race, education, sex, gender, whatever it is. I'm going to do this one along with you guys. Okay, so three descriptors of myself. I am a Black, cisgendered, university educated woman. I gave you 4. Those are my 3, 4. Jhanelle, do you have 3, 4?
Mine would be I am a therapist, Black, and foodie.
Okay, amazing. Now, if any of you would like to drop some descriptors in the chat box, that's okay too. If you just like to write them down, that's okay too. Now, Jhanelle, you brought up a really good example when we were preparing for this around what an advantage might look like. Now, there's advantages that are very obvious, right? But then there are some that are like we've been carrying them for such a long time that we might not really even know that they're there. Do you mind sharing the example you brought up?
Sure. So I kind of want you guys to just picture the scenario, the situation. An individual walks into a bank and they're going into this bank with a check, right? And the check has a very large sum. They work, they, got retro pay at the same time. So now they're ready to go deposit this check. They're very joyous and like, you know what, I got my money. I'm ready to go put this in my bank. And they've been banking with this banking institution for the last 6 years. And they go to a new teller, present the check, and they're told or they're asked, well, where did this money come from? Now I'm going to add something to this situation. The person depositing the check happens to be a Black female. And now she's sitting there thinking, well, why am I being asked where is this from? It says the name of my employment. I've been banking here for the last 5 years and I do this all the time, but I'm being questioned. And she goes back to speak to a colleague of hers who is a white female, works at the same place and who banks at the same bank and has done this exact same process as well, and asks, well, did you get questioned? Did they ask you where this check is from or what it's for? And she's like, no. I want you to kind of just sit for a second. I'm not going to say anything else yet. But what kind of thoughts do you think might come up for that Black female that went to deposit that check? And you don't have to put it in the chat, but just think about it for a second. And where privilege falls into this, what that looks like is, her colleague really said to her, well, I never even had to think about that. I've never had to think about what this might look like based off of a question, or what changes the situation based off of something like that. And this is what we want to share, where privilege sometimes doesn't always come, like Allison said, it's not blatant, it's not right in front of you, but it's as simple as not having to ask yourself, what does this mean? Why am I questioned? That's what privilege can look like, right? And it's knowing that somebody based on the color of their skin might have to think about things once, twice, 3 times before they can even figure out what it really is.
And to add to that, because that's something that one might have to consider, it changes their behavior in their approach to the simple things that they do in their daily lives. And the reason why this example resonated with me is because I'm a hairstylist. I work in the world of cash. I've been banking with my bank for a very long time. And every week or so, don't clock me, I go into my bank with my cash. They see my business account, I pop in my card, I hand them my cash, I go about my business. For the most part. But every once in a while, somebody will blatantly ask me, where did you get this money? And that's something that I experience now, but it's also something that I used to experience when I watched my father, a Black man who owned a business, who was a mechanic, who would also go into the bank with cash or a check and be held for days, weeks before they accepted the money. And I truly thought it was normal until I shared these stories with my other counterparts or my friends who were not of the same color and they had completely different experiences. So now we've got the descriptors down, okay? I know we slid away a little bit there. Let's come back to it. You've got your descriptors. Now, every descriptors, next slide, please, carries a certain advantage with it, right? So what are some of the advantages, or maybe just one or two, that each of your descriptors might carry? So I'm going to go back to mine. Mine was I'm Black, I'm cisgendered, I'm university educated, and I'm a woman. So, I mean, we'll do a light one. I'm Black, so I got this afro. It's pretty lit. I'm cisgendered, so I tend to experience less discrimination. I'm university educated, which means that I should have access to higher paying jobs, increased access, more opportunities, and I'm a woman. So, I mean, advantage everything, right? Okay. So, does everybody have one or two advantages that one of your descriptors might have? Jhanelle, do you have an advantage that one of your descriptors might have?
I would say that being Black, you get to, change. I think when you're talking about hair, you said afro. The first thing that came to me was changing my hair, like the ability to change it so freely. And just knowing that that's part of something that's ingrained with being Black. So I think that was the one that came up. I really want to see what everyone else shares. We have university graduate, which of course, like you said, Allison, access to better jobs, being employed, having that paycheck, and a sense of security. Black, having a rich history and beautiful culture, love it. Filipino, positive stereotypes for the most part, female cisgendered, and first year psych student, which is for their education.
Somebody here's good credit. Yeah.
Good credit. I like that one.
Go on. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, remember, we're taking away the idea that privilege, advantage is like a bad thing. We are going to debunk this mindset, okay? So I have a little sentence here, and we're going to play a little fill in the blanks. Do you have your descriptors and do you have your advantages? So the question here is, when I use my advantage to support or protect another, does it make me less of a descriptor 1, 2, or 3? I'm going to fill in the blank first, and then you guys fill in the blanks. When I use my advantage of increased access because of my education to support or protect another, does it make me less of a Black, cisgendered, university educated woman? When I use my advantage of less discrimination to protect or support another, does it make me less of a Black, cisgendered, university educated woman? Everybody's saying no, it doesn't. Okay. Now, does anybody want to use a text box to maybe fill in this question for themselves? I think the piece around racism is that there's this idea that there's not enough to go around, right? That if I give it away, then there won't be any left for me. So I can't talk about this person being good, or I can't praise them, or if I defend them, everything will become uncomfortable. We have to debunk the mindset that sharing means decreasing. Let's go to our next slide. Fact. Sharing your privilege does not decrease it. Your privilege is not decreased when shared. When we give generously with an abundance mentality, what we give away can multiply. What we are asking what is being asked of you as an ally is not to throw away your advantages or your privileges, but to activate them so that many other people can also enjoy those advantages and create new opportunities for themselves. Next slide, please. Okay, there's so much to gain from allyship, right? Here are some very basic ones. You create a safe space. You get new perspectives and new ideas. My favorite is that you discourage racism. You change what the culture looks like in your space. And you get to enhance your own worldview. My favorite?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Allison. Which one is your favorite?
Yes. Okay, my favorite is you create safe spaces, because it's just such a very basic thing. When you feel safe, right? You are more productive. You are more helpful. You can produce, like, there's just so much to be said of, even think of when we put a child in a space that is safe and then put a child in a space that is dangerous. There is so much discussion around, why does this group behave this way? Or why is she acting like this? Have you considered that many people do not feel safe in the spaces that they have to work in, the spaces that they're educated in, the spaces that they have to seek healthcare in? Your role as an ally is to create more safe spaces. What stands out to you here, Jhanelle?
I was going to say, this really brought me back to what you were talking about in the beginning, and being a support. So being there alongside the group, right? Being there alongside those individuals to support them. And I think that in turn fits all of these, right? That creates that safe space that discourages racism. So when somebody is around you, they're gonna be like, well, you know what? I can't be like this around this person, because they're going to tell me something, right? They're going to tell me that it's not okay. And now I know that, you know, I can't say this around here. And I think that alone, if somebody feels like you are part of a safe space, others will not want to come in there and say the things that will make other people uncomfortable. And if it only happens in your space, that's all you can control. And I think it's really important to note that you can't control what somebody does outside of your space. But if you know that, hey, there's going to be a moment in time, maybe when I'm in the office with my colleague, that other people know, because I stand up for the fact that, you know, their voice has to be heard as well. That other person's not going to come and make that judgmental comment, or they're not going to come and make that person feel uncomfortable. And that matters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I like. Now, did anything come up in the chat box that you want to highlight before we conclude?
One, it's also important not to boost that you are using your advantage to be an ally. I think that's a great thing to share. And I know Allison and I were talking about it a bit earlier, that kind of look at it as, sorry, there's construction happening, so if you guys hear that, kind of look at it as the individual is the person with like the megaphone, right? Like that's the person standing out, sharing what their challenge looks like. And you're there helping them get into the space where they can use their megaphone. Right? It's letting you know that you don't have to, like this person has commented, you're not boosting about it. You're just giving them the access and allowing them to be heard and supported.
Right. Open the door, pass over the megaphone. Okay. Now, next slide, please. Okay, so what can we do to help? I gave you all of this information. You're fired up, you're ready to go. What do you do with it? I'm going to give you 2 simple things we can do to help. Next slides, please. Use your voice to amplify marginalized people. Open the door, hand over the microphone. Your job is to use your privilege or advantage to share and amplify the words, research, experience of those voices that have been historically silenced. It's important to realize that the voice of an ally works alongside the voices of the oppressed, not above and not beyond them. Next slide, please. Don't, I beg, put unnecessary emotional labor on the already oppressed group. So what can that look like? Okay, you can avoid this by conducting your own research. Google. Seeking historical classes, joining activist groups, reading books and articles, watching films, documentaries, listening to podcasts, attending speeches that shed light on this perspective. And also using the resources that have already been laid out by many experts. Okay, next slide, please. So it's call to action time. I would like to give everybody the opportunity right now, very quickly here, in the chat box, to drop, and you don't have to be very specific, but drop one way that you would like to be supported. One way that you might like to be supported. We are giving the opportunity from the voices of the marginalized to share how they might like to be supported. And if you choose to be an ally, if I didn't rub you the wrong way today and you still want to be an ally, my question is, how can I open myself up to support what others may need? Is there someone who might benefit from my privilege or advantage that I could help at this time? And how can I activate my resources to grant others opportunities that I have too?
We have some answers for the first one, and that is to be believed, listened to, and validated, which speaks to a lot of what you shared earlier on today. And some other responses are some individuals said they would ask thoughtful and authentic questions. And like we shared before, you don't have to put it in the chat. You can kind of sit with it and reflect on what you're going to do to call this to action. We also have fight for systemic change so that others don't have to. Again, listening. And this is something I think, Allison, you'll be touching on a bit later, the importance of listening. And sharing their platform. I really like that one. We have someone who the boots stood out. Think about what my boots are doing. How I'm gonna move them.
I like it. I like it. Okay, well, we just have one more moment before 12 o'clock. But if you gained anything from today, there's two ways you can let me know. We have a feedback form that is on the website. But you can also put a thumbs up or a thank you or a I'll be back in the text box. And we really do take your feedback very seriously, as these sessions are dynamic. We look at what you need and we refocus, we rebuild them. We are answering, we are here to answer, to provide spaces where these conversations can happen frankly, safely, because we know this is hard to navigate. It's not a simple answer. I'm sure there's things that I said today that people might have been like, what is this? What is this girl talking about? We are all figuring it out. So your input is just as important as mine, and I'd love to hear it. Okay, you guys are making me feel good.
Lots of love being shared.
Yes. Filling me
We're
up.
definitely glad you guys enjoyed it, and that it provoked some thought and some reflection more than anything.
Yes. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what's up next. Right now, the group is centered around faculty, staff, librarians, everybody's here today. Our next session, which is going to look much like this, is for our students, which is on October 27th. So if you know of any students, or if you'd like to come back and rejoin that conversation, you're welcome to do so. And I'm going to thank you all so much for listening to me for an entire hour, because I know my voice could be a little annoying. And I'm going to hand it over to Jody to close this out. But thank you so much. Jhanelle, do you have any last words you want to leave the group with?
Just really take the time to reflect on what you feel, reflect on what came up, write it down and process it later. We all know that we got life to take care of after this. I know how it goes, but it doesn't mean it has to disappear. So write it down right now. You can always come back to what you felt.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, at this point, just register me for the School of Allison and Jhanelle Peters. Like at this point, like just register me and I'll be
scholarships.
I shifted to the couch. I grabbed some crackers and I got a delivery of this particular book that I just wanted to share with everyone. It's called My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies by Resma Menachem, if I'm pronouncing the last name right. So just wanting to share, I don't know if this was the universe just doing its thing. I'm wanting to invite just a brief read where there's a section of the book that states, do not cross this line without authorization. And in one of the listings, she states, if you are convinced that ending white supremacy begins with social and political action, do not read this book unless you are willing to be challenged. We need to begin with the healing of trauma. And speaks to social and political actions are essential, but they need to be part of a larger strategy of healing, justice, and creating room for growth. And so I just found that particular component to be very centered in how we think about our collective action in really addressing racism in all of its forms. So just wanting to say thank you. It was excellent. It was excellent. I have notes. I know many folks are taking notes. I want to say thank you so very much. For all of you who held space with us, thank you for joining. I hope that you took something, one thing at minimum, that we can intentionally incorporate in our day-to-day. Know that there are some upcoming sessions, including our second speaker series focused on anti-Asian racism and xenophobia on November 25th. This is open to external community as well as U of T community to attend. And then as mentioned, we have the upcoming Restore sessions in December. So without much further ado, just want to say thank you for holding this space with the Anti-Racism Office. The partnership is just, my goodness. I'm so happy. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Jhanelle, for sharing your gems with us each and every moment that we can. I can't wait for our next session, particularly with our students on the 27th. And to all of you, just enjoy your lunch. If there's a little bit of sunshine in your backyard, please, or in your spaces, please go enjoy it. And we look forward to connecting with you once again. Many thanks to you all. Have a great day.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Bye.